The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the airport's massive glass windows as Mira adjusted the straps of her backpack, double-checking her flight ticket for what felt like the 100th time. Her heart was racing with excitement. This wasn't just any ordinary flight. She had spent months preparing for Stanford University's summer program, writing essays, gathering recommendations, and even working part-time at a local cafe to save up for extra expenses. The bustling airport terminal was filled with the usual morning rush. Business travelers hurrying past with their rolling suitcases, families herding sleepy children toward their gates, and airline staff efficiently directing the flow of travelers. Mira had arrived 3 hours early, not wanting to take any chances. Her parents had just dropped her off, giving her tight hugs and proud smiles before heading back home for work. Everything seemed perfect until she reached the gate. As passengers lined up for boarding, Mira confidently stepped forward, passport and boarding pass in hand. The gate agent, a middle-aged man with thick-rimmed glasses, looked at her passport, then at her, then back at the passport again. His brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you board," he said, his voice carrying that practiced customer service tone that somehow managed to sound both polite and completely unmovable. Mira's stomach dropped. "What? Why not?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as other passengers began to glance curiously in their direction. The gate agent pointed to her passport photo. "This doesn't match your current appearance. The security protocols are very strict about this." He was referring to Mira's recent haircut. She had traded her waist-length hair for a modern shoulder-length style just 2 weeks ago, hoping to start her summer program with a fresh look. But it's still me," Mira stammered, pulling out her student ID, her driver's license, anything that could prove her identity. "Look, I have other forms of identification. I can't miss this flight. The program starts tomorrow." Her hands trembled as she watched other passengers walking past her to board. The reality of the situation started to sink in. She might miss the opportunity she had worked so hard for. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, trying to maintain her composure. She quickly pulled out her phone to call her parents, but they were already halfway home. The morning traffic would make it impossible for them to turn back in time. As she stood there, watching her dreams seemingly crumble over something as simple as a haircut, she noticed several passengers watching the scene unfold. Some shook their heads in sympathy, while others seemed annoyed by the delay. Just when it felt like all hope was lost, a confident voice spoke up from behind her. "Excuse me, but I believe there might be a misunderstanding about the passport photo regulations." The voice belonged to a woman wearing a crisp business suit, who had been quietly observing the situation while working on her laptop at the gate. Little did Mira know that this moment, which felt like the worst of her life, was about to take an unexpected turn. Sometimes, the universe has a way of turning our biggest obstacles into the most remarkable stories. And this was just the beginning. Mira's fingers trembled as she held her phone, trying to explain the situation to her parents through tears. The airport's fluorescent lights seemed harsh now, and the excited chatter of other passengers felt like it was mocking her dreams. Her mom's voice crackled through the speaker, filled with worry and frustration. "But sweetheart, they checked your documents yesterday. We made sure everything was perfect," her mom said, the sound of traffic humming in the background. They were stuck on the highway, too far to turn back now. Mira watched as the last few passengers made their way onto the plane. Each person who walked past felt like another nail in the coffin of her summer dreams. She had spent the entire year preparing for this moment, staying up late to finish her application essays, skipping weekend hangouts with friends to work extra shifts, and even learning basic coding to get a head start on the program. The gate agent had moved on to preparing for final boarding announcements, acting as if he hadn't just shattered someone's dreams. Mira slumped into one of the uncomfortable airport chairs, her carefully packed backpack now feeling like a weight of broken promises. She pulled out the program acceptance letter, its Stanford letterhead gleaming under the airport lights. The words, "Congratulations," now seemed to mock her. A kind-looking elderly couple seated nearby offered her a tissue. "Don't give up just yet, dear," the woman said softly. "Sometimes these things have a way of working themselves out." Mira managed a weak smile, but her mind was racing through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Would she lose her spot in the program? Would they give it to someone else? What about the non-refundable housing deposit her parents had paid? She opened her laptop, hands shaking as she typed an email to the program coordinators. How could she explain this situation without sounding completely irresponsible? The cursor blinked at her mockingly as she struggled to find the right words. A small crowd had gathered near the gate desk, some people whispering and pointing in her direction. Mira felt her face flush with embarrassment. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She was always the prepared one, the student who turned in assignments early, the daughter who never caused problems. Now she felt like a spectacle, her private disappointment on display for everyone to see. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends who had been waiting to hear about her safe arrival. How could she tell them she hadn't even made it onto the plane? The thought of explaining this to everyone back home made her stomach churn. Her best friend had even planned a mini celebration for when she returned, convinced Mira would come back with amazing stories and experiences. The business suit-wearing woman who had spoken up earlier was now engaged in what appeared to be an intense but quiet conversation with another airline staff member. Mira tried not to get her hopes up, but she couldn't help watching from the corner of her eye. The woman's presence had a commanding energy about it, the kind that made people stop and listen. Through her tears, Mira noticed more people had their phones out, some apparently recording the scene. Great, she thought. Now her humiliation might become viral content. But there was something different about their expressions. They didn't look amused or entertained. They looked concerned, even angry, but not at her. The atmosphere at the gate had shifted. What started as a simple denial of boarding was turning into something else entirely. As Mira wiped her eyes with the tissue, she didn't realize that this moment of despair was about to transform into something none of them could have predicted. Sometimes, the worst moments in our lives become turning points, and this story was far from over. The business-suited woman who had been observing the situation made her way to the gate desk with purposeful steps. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from years of experience. "My name is Priya Kumar," she announced, placing her briefcase on the counter. "I'm a civil rights attorney, and I couldn't help but notice what's happening here." The gate agent's expression flickered slightly, the first crack in his bureaucratic armor. Priya pulled out her business card and placed it on the counter, then turned to give Mira a reassuring smile. "Don't worry," she said softly. "Let's sort this out together." Turning back to the gate agent, Priya's voice took on a professional tone that commanded attention. "Could you please cite the specific regulation that states a haircut invalidates a passport photo?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, but her tone remained perfectly polite. Other passengers who had been lingering nearby began to gather closer, drawn to this unexpected development. A young man in a tech company hoodie had his phone out, streaming the interaction. An older businessman canceled his phone call to watch. A mother hushed her curious children, telling them they were watching something important. The gate agent shuffled through some papers, his earlier certainty beginning to waver. "It's standard security protocol," he began, but Priya gently cut him off. "Actually," she said, pulling out her tablet, "I have the current transportation security regulations right here. Would you like to review them together?" She wasn't aggressive or confrontational, just calmly confident in her knowledge. According to these guidelines, minor appearance changes such as haircuts, hair color, or facial hair do not invalidate passport photos. Mira watched in amazement as this stranger advocated for her. More phones were out now, recording the scene. Someone in the crowd whispered, "This is going viral for sure." But unlike the embarrassing viral videos Mira had feared earlier, this felt different, like watching justice unfold in real time. A younger airline staff member who had been listening nearby disappeared briefly and returned with someone wearing a manager's badge. The new arrival took in the scene, the growing crowd, the recording phones, the professional attorney with her documentation, and the tearful teenager whose dreams hung in the balance. Minor appearance changes are perfectly acceptable. Priya continued, addressing the manager directly now. This young lady has multiple forms of current ID confirming her identity. She's traveling to attend a prestigious university program, an opportunity she earned through hard work. Are we really going to deny her this chance over a haircut? The crowd murmured in agreement. The elderly couple who had offered Mira tissues earlier nodded approvingly. A group of college students who had been watching gave quiet thumbs-up signals. It was strange and touching to see so many strangers invested in her story. You know, the manager said, looking thoughtful, perhaps we should review this situation more thoroughly. It was the first hint that things might change, and Mira felt her heart leap with hope. Priya nodded encouragingly. That would be the appropriate course of action. We all want to ensure proper security while treating passengers fairly and respectfully. Her words were diplomatic, offering everyone a graceful way to resolve the situation. The atmosphere had transformed completely from just minutes ago. What started as a lonely, humiliating moment had become something else entirely. A small but powerful demonstration of how people can come together to stand up for what's right. Mira watched in awe as Priya continued her calm but persistent advocacy. She had always read about moments like this, where strangers step in to help others, but experiencing it firsthand was different. This wasn't just about catching a flight anymore. It was about dignity, fairness, and the power of speaking up. The situation at the gate had transformed into something bigger than anyone expected. What started as one teenager's travel troubles had become a moment that captured everyone's attention. The young guy in the tech hoodie who had been streaming the whole thing spoke up excitedly. This is getting thousands of views right now. People are sharing it like crazy. His words caught the attention of the airline manager, whose expression shifted from concern to slightly alarmed. The power of social media was turning this small airport gate into the center of a much larger conversation. Comments were pouring in from viewers around the world, most of them supporting Mira and questioning the airline's actions. Look at these comments, someone in the crowd said, holding up their phone. People are tagging the airline's official accounts. It's trending in 3 cities already. The manager pulled out his own phone, likely seeing the same flood of notifications. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he made what appeared to be some urgent messages. Priya, the attorney, maintained her composed demeanor, but now had an extra card to play. It seems, she said carefully, that this situation is garnering quite a bit of public attention. Perhaps we could focus on finding a solution that works for everyone. Her tone was professional, but the implication was clear. This was becoming a public relations issue. The crowd had grown larger, with even passengers from nearby gates coming over to watch. A flight attendant from another airline stopped to observe, whispering to her colleague about how this could affect all airlines' policies. 2 pilots walking past slowed down to listen, nodding in agreement with Priya's points about passenger rights. Mira's phone buzzed constantly now. Messages from her parents, her friends, and even strangers who had somehow found her social media profiles. The video was spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. She watched as people shared their own stories of similar experiences in the comments, turning her personal struggle into a conversation about passenger rights and common sense in air travel. The tech-savvy observers in the crowd were quick to point out the broader impact. The hashtag #LetMiraBoard is trending, announced a college student, showing her screen to others nearby. People are sharing stories about unfair treatment at airports all over the country. What made the situation even more powerful was how it brought together such a diverse group of supporters. The elderly couple who had first shown kindness to Mira were now chatting with a group of teenage travelers. A businessman in an expensive suit found common ground with a backpacking student. Everyone seemed to recognize the fundamental unfairness of the situation. The airline staff huddled together, speaking in hushed tones and occasionally glancing at their phones. The original gate agent who had denied Mira boarding looked increasingly uncomfortable as he watched the situation spiral far beyond a simple gate decision. Other airline employees from nearby gates walked past slowly, clearly interested in how this would play out. Through it all, Preya kept the focus on the key issue. "We're not asking for special treatment," she explained to the growing audience. "We're simply asking for reasonable interpretation of existing rules. A haircut should never stand between a young person and their educational opportunities." The mounting pressure from social media, combined with the in-person crowd and Preya's steady legal arguments, was creating a perfect storm that the airline couldn't ignore. The manager was now on his phone again, this time speaking quietly but intensely with someone who seemed to be higher up in the company. Mira watched all of this unfold with a mix of hope and amazement. Just an hour ago, she had felt completely powerless. Now she was at the center of what felt like a movement, watching as strangers united to stand up for what was right. The very tools that she had feared would broadcast her humiliation were instead becoming instruments of support and change. The airport gate area had become a hub of activity, with Preya now pulling up more documentation on her tablet. "Let me show you something interesting," she said, addressing both the manager and the growing crowd. She displayed official travel guidelines that clearly showed passport photos remained valid despite changes in appearance like haircuts, facial hair, or even glasses. The manager leaned in to look at the screen, his forehead wrinkled in concentration. Behind him, 3 more airline staff members had gathered, all watching the situation unfold. One of them was frantically typing on her phone, likely communicating with the airline's corporate office. "Our company prides itself on customer service," the manager began, his tone noticeably softer than before. "Perhaps we should." He was interrupted by his phone buzzing. The caller ID made his eyes widen slightly. It was someone from the airline's headquarters. The crowd fell quiet as he took the call, stepping a few feet away, but still in view. Even without hearing the conversation, everyone could tell from his expression and quick nods that something significant was happening. The power of social media had pushed this story of the corporate ladder faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Mira's phone lit up with a new message, this time from the Stanford program coordinator. "We're aware of your situation," the message read. "Don't worry about being late. We're saving your spot." She showed the message to Preya, who smiled warmly. "You see," Preya said to the manager when he returned, "this isn't just about a flight. This is about a young person's future, about common sense prevailing over rigid interpretations of rules." Her words resonated with everyone watching, from the busy business travelers to the young families with children. The elderly couple who had first comforted Mira were now sharing their own story with nearby passengers. "Our granddaughter went through something similar," the woman explained. "Sometimes these rules just don't make sense." Others nodded in agreement, some sharing their own experiences with overly strict interpretations of travel policies. The tech-savvy guy who had been streaming everything checked his viewer count and whistled softly. "This is going seriously viral," he announced. News websites are picking up the story. They're calling it Haircut versus Airline, the battle of common sense. The manager returned from his phone call. His entire demeanor changed. He straightened his tie and cleared his throat. After reviewing the situation and consulting with our leadership team, he paused, looking around at all the recording phones. "We agree that perhaps we were being overly cautious in this case." A ripple of approval went through the crowd. Someone in the back started clapping, and others joined in. The original gate agent, who had started all this, looked both embarrassed and relieved that the situation was finally being resolved. "We can get you on the next flight to San Francisco," the manager continued, addressing Mira directly for the first time. "It leaves in 2 hours. And," he glanced at his notes, "we'd like to upgrade you to first class as a gesture of goodwill." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Cheers and applause broke out. Phones were raised higher to capture the moment, and social media exploded with updates. The hashtag #HaircutGate was already being replaced with hashtag #JusticeForMira and hashtag #CommonSenseWins. Priya placed a gentle hand on Mira's shoulder. See, sometimes standing up for what's right really does make a difference. Her words carried extra weight now, backed by the visible proof of positive change happening right before their eyes. The moment felt surreal. Just hours ago, Mira had been in tears, watching her dreams seemingly slip away. Now she was not only going to make it to Stanford, but her experience was sparking important conversations about travel policies and common sense approaches to security. The next 2 hours at the airport passed in a whirlwind of activity. The airline's customer service team had swung into full gear, providing Mira with access to their exclusive lounge while she waited for her new flight. As she sat in a comfortable lounge chair, sipping fresh orange juice, she could hardly believe how much had changed in just a few hours. "Your story is everywhere," said the friendly lounge attendant, showing Mira her phone. Major news websites had picked up the story, with headlines like "Teens Haircut Sparks Airport Revolution" and "Power of Social Media Changes Airline Policy." The comments sections were flooded with similar stories from other travelers, turning Mira's experience into a catalyst for change. Priya had stayed with her, using the time to explain more about passenger rights. "You know," she said, pulling out her business card, "this is exactly why I became a lawyer. Sometimes people just need someone to stand up and say, 'This isn't right.'" She handed the card to Mira, encouraging her to stay in touch. The airline's response had gone beyond just the flight upgrade. The regional director had personally called to apologize, explaining that they would be reviewing and updating their training procedures. "Your experience has helped us identify a gap in our system," he explained over speakerphone. "We're grateful for the opportunity to improve." Social media couldn't get enough of the story. The young tech guy who had started streaming earlier stopped by the lounge to show Mira the latest statistics. His video had over 1 million views, and the hashtag #HaircutGate had evolved into a movement. People were sharing their own photos of passport pictures versus current appearances, challenging outdated notions of identity verification. "You've started something big," he said excitedly. Other airlines are already releasing statements about their photo ID policies. This is going to change things for a lot of people. The elderly couple who had first shown kindness to Mira came to say goodbye before their own flight. "You reminded us of our granddaughter," the woman said warmly. "She's about your age and just as brave. Never stop standing up for what's right." Her husband nodded in agreement, adding, "And good luck at Stanford. Show them what you're made of." Even the original gate agent came to the lounge, looking genuinely apologetic. "I was just following what I thought were the rules," he explained. "But today taught me that rules need to be applied with common sense." His humility and willingness to learn from the situation added another layer of positivity to the story. Mira's parents called again, this time celebrating the turn of events. "We're so proud of you," her mom said, her voice full of emotion. "Not just for getting into the program, but for handling this situation with such grace." Her dad chimed in. "And now you're making things better for other travelers too." As the time for her new flight approached, Mira gathered her things, feeling both excited and slightly overwhelmed. A small group of well-wishers had gathered to see her off, including some of the passengers who had witnessed the earlier drama. Someone had even made a quick sign reading "Stanford bound, no haircut drama." The first-class flight attendant who would be serving on her flight came to escort her personally. "We've heard all about you," she said with a warm smile. "Your seat is ready, and we've made sure everything will be perfect for your journey." Walking through the terminal toward her new gate, Mira felt different. The scared, tearful teenager from a few hours ago had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned firsthand about the power of standing up for what's right. The messages of support were still pouring in, not just for her, but from people who felt inspired to share their own stories of overcoming unfair situations. 3 weeks into her Stanford program, Mira's phone buzzed with a notification that made her smile. The airline had just announced major changes to their training program, specifically addressing passenger identification policies. Her story had sparked a chain reaction that nobody could have predicted. The airline's press release mentioned a recent incident that highlighted the need for change, a polite reference to what social media users were still calling #HaircutGate. They were introducing new guidelines that emphasized common-sense approaches to passenger identification, along with enhanced customer service training for all gate agents. During her morning break from coding class, Mira received an email from Priya that made her nearly spill her coffee. "I've been invited to speak at the National Transportation Forum," the lawyer wrote, "and they want you to join me. Your story has become a perfect example of how social media and public awareness can drive positive change in the travel industry." The news spread quickly through her dorm. Her roommate, who had heard the story countless times, squealed with excitement. "See, I told you this was bigger than just one flight." Other students gathered around, some sharing their own travel horror stories, others asking for advice about standing up for their rights. That evening, during a video call with her parents, Mira noticed something different about herself as she excitedly shared the news. The shy girl who would have once been terrified of public speaking was gone. In her place was someone confident, someone who understood the importance of speaking up. "You know what's really amazing?" her dad said, beaming with pride. "The airline's policy changes have already helped other travelers." He showed her a news article about a young athlete who had been initially questioned about his passport photo after getting a different haircut for a competition. "They immediately cited your case and let him board without any issues." The Stanford program coordinators were supportive of her upcoming speaking engagement, even offering to help her prepare. Her computer science professor, after hearing about the forum, suggested incorporating a discussion about technology and social media's role in social change into their next class project. During lunch, Mira often found herself chatting with other students about the incident. "It's wild how one moment can change so much," said a girl from her coding class. "My cousin works at another airline, and she says they're all reviewing their policies now. They don't want to be the next viral story." The young tech guide who had streamed the original incident kept in touch, sending updates about how the video was being used in training sessions for customer service representatives. "They're using it as an example of what not to do," he messaged, "and how to handle situations with more flexibility and understanding." Priya had become a mentor of sorts, regularly sending Mira articles about similar cases and encouraging her interest in law. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments," she wrote in one email. "Your haircut might just revolutionize how airlines think about passenger identification." The support from strangers hadn't stopped either. Mira's social media accounts were filled with messages from people sharing their own stories of standing up against unfair treatment. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to say thank you for giving them courage to speak up in their own situations. Late one night, working on her coding project, Mira found herself thinking about that morning at the airport. What had felt like the worst moment of her life had turned into something powerful. The elderly couple's kind words, Priya's confident intervention, the supportive crowd, it all came together to create change that went far beyond one missed flight. Her phone buzzed again. Another news notification about airlines updating their policies. Reading it, she couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best way to fix a broken system was to show everyone exactly how it was failing. Her simple haircut had done exactly that. 6 months after the airport incident, Mira stood backstage at the National Transportation Forum, adjusting her conference badge. The huge convention center was packed with airline executives, policymakers, and transportation experts. Through the curtain, she could see Priya already on stage, setting up their presentation. And now, the moderator's voice boomed through the speakers. "Please welcome our next speaker, whose experience sparked a nationwide conversation about common sense in travel policies." Mira took a deep breath and walked onto the stage, smiling as she saw her parents beaming proudly in the front row. The spotlight felt warm as she began sharing her story. "I never thought a haircut could cause so much trouble," she started, earning knowing chuckles from the audience. "But sometimes the smallest things show us where big changes are needed." The crowd listened intently as she described that morning at the airport, many nodding in recognition of similar experiences. As she spoke, slides showed the social media impact. Millions of views, thousands of shared stories, and most importantly, the policy changes that followed. 5 major airlines had updated their identification guidelines, specifically mentioning reasonable appearance changes. 3 more were in the process of reviewing their policies. The former gate agent who had denied her boarding was actually in the audience. The airline had sent him as part of their new training program. He stood up during the Q&A session. "That day changed how I approach my job," he shared honestly. "Sometimes rules need to be balanced with common sense." A transportation security expert raised her hand. "Your case has become part of our training materials," she explained. "We use it to teach new officers about the importance of reasonable judgment in passenger identification." Mira couldn't help but smile. Her small act of standing up for herself had created ripples she never expected. After the presentation, a group of young travelers approached her. "We started a passenger rights group because of your story," one explained excitedly. "We help people understand their rights and share information about airline policies." They showed her their website, filled with resources and success stories. During the conference lunch break, Mira sat with Priya, discussing their next project. "The thing is," Priya said, stirring her coffee, "your story resonated because it could have happened to anyone. That's what made it powerful." They were working on a guide for travelers, helping them understand their rights and how to advocate for themselves. The tech guide who had streamed the original incident was now running a successful travel rights channel. He'd been invited to the forum too, and his latest video about Mira's speech was already trending. "From viral moment to actual change," he said, showing her the view count. "That's what social media should be about." Later that evening, at a small dinner celebration with her parents and Priya, Mira scrolled through the messages on her phone. People were still reaching out, sharing their own stories of standing up against unfair treatment. A message from her Stanford professor caught her eye. He wanted her to give a guest lecture about technology's role in social change. "You know what's funny?" she said to her parents. "I almost wish I could thank that first gate agent. Without that moment, none of this would have happened." Her mom squeezed her hand, understanding how far her daughter had come from that tearful morning at the airport. The elderly couple who had first comforted her had become regular email pen pals. Their latest message read, "Keep changing the world, one small step at a time." Their granddaughter had recently started college, inspired by Mira's story to study public policy. As the evening wound down, Mira thought about everything that had changed in 6 months. A simple haircut had turned into a movement about common sense in travel policies. But more than that, it had shown her and countless others that one voice, backed by truth and supported by others, could create real change.